You've made it to Chiro Hustle Live. Sit back and learn from the greatest influencers in the profession. This week's episode is brought to you by Imaging Services, ChiroThin, Chiro Moguls, Mahalo Wellness, McCaffrey's Clinical Mentoring, Local Gold, Chiro Health USA, The Goodman Factor, Chiropractic Rocks, Winner's Edge, Accident Records, Chiro Tax Pro, Full Script, your online dispensary, Angela Pearson, author of I'm Not Contagious, and Digital Hustle. Let's hustle.
I have Angela Pearson. You're coming in from upstate New York, and I'm coming in from Grand Junction, which is the Grand Valley, and I'm on the western side of Colorado. And I moved here about 3 years ago just because I wanted to get away from the hustle and bustle. And you and I were just talking about being up in upstate New York and how there's no sunshine. And anyways, welcome to the show. This is a sponsorship edition, and I really want people to know more about what your initiatives are and a book that you are releasing soon. And it's called I'm Not Contagious. But a lot of this has to do with your journey. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that are probably scratching their head right now and like, well, what is going on with the sponsorship of this book with Chiro Hustle? And they're probably interested to know about what you're actually doing and the why behind it. So we'll get into that as we have our discussion today. But let's just talk a little bit about your holistic journey and what got you to where you are today.
You know, like we talked about, I'm from North Carolina, and I now live in upstate New York, but I grew up poor. Like my family we were dirt poor. We grew up on canned foods, mostly from the food bank, right? So, and if you've ever eaten like canned foods, you know that they're loaded with sodium, and it just, you're not really tasting like what real food tastes like. And growing up as a child, kids were seen and not heard. That's what I was taught growing up. So I wasn't allowed to ask questions. I wasn't allowed to question anything because we weren't allowed to speak unless we were spoken to. So with my oldest son, you know, moving forward with my oldest son, he was vaccinated. He was vaccinated up until the age of 2, and he had a reaction. But then I didn't know if it was a reaction or not because, like many, I trust medical doctors. And he was hospitalized. He couldn't keep any food down. He was dehydrated, so he was hospitalized. I then asked the doctor, I said, does this have anything to do with the vaccine that he just got 2 days before? No, it has nothing to do with that. This is whatever. And I'm just like, well, it's kind of weird to me that he didn't start having these symptoms until after he was vaccinated. But I was a young mom. I didn't question the medical doctor. What did I know? So, you know, I kind of let that go, but he didn't have any more vaccines, after the age of 2. So then a few years later, I actually met someone whose family was using essential oils for medicinal purposes. So they didn't use modern medicine. So this got me thinking like, wow, what are you using this for? Like, this is foreign to me. And it was just kind of almost like witchery, because that's what you're told, this whole stigma with using anything other than modern medicines. It's witchery. It has some sort of stigma to it. So I started asking the hard questions. I started researching vaccines because by this time I was pregnant now with my daughter, who will be 19 this year. So after going to the CDC and researching all the ingredients, I took it upon myself to kind of figure out like what these ingredients actually meant. Like what were they, and why were they putting them in our vaccines, and then we're pumping them into ourselves and we're pumping them to our children. No one's asking why. So, I was given a lot of information by this family, and I was introduced to chiropractors, and I was introduced to other people in the holistic field. And, they were very encouraging for me to go out and just kind of research all this information myself. And that's exactly what I do to people too. Like, I can tell you my story and I can tell you what the ingredients are, but if you're not doing the research yourself, you're not looking and seeing it for yourself, you're really doing yourself a disservice. So not only did I go on the CDC website, but I also went on VAERS, which is a website that you can go on and you can see adverse reactions that people were having to these vaccines. And then I started, pouring myself into Facebook groups. I wanted to hear what other mothers and other fathers were saying about their experiences with vaccines. And I think that we have to start there. And for someone who doesn't understand why I believe and why I feel and why I choose not to vaccinate, we have to start listening. Communication isn't enough. We have to really just put our differences aside and really start listening to what someone else is saying.
Yeah, you say some things that I think that I could put some reckoning to. And one of those things is with the whole abortion campaign is my body, my choice.
Mm-hmm.
We should also have that be the standard for when it comes to how we take care of our families and how we take care of our families, especially with any type of chemicals. And I think that people don't realize that the things that are inside of any type of medicine as we know it, it's a chemical compound. And the chemical compound isn't always really safe. And, there was a guy back in the day that was going for presidency. His name was Ralph Nader. And he wrote this book called Unsafe at Any Speed.
Mm-hmm.
And the book was about the automobile industry. And he's like, you guys will get inside of a thing that floats on rubber tires, that has air in them, that's full of liquids that are combustible, with glass that surrounds it and metal that will shard you. And you'll jump in these things and you'll trust them because you trust transportation. But really what you don't understand is these things, once they're combusted and they get damaged and they get hit, they are dangerous. And the fuel industry is dangerous, and the carbons that they put off is dangerous. And that's just it, is like we do these things as humans that we think that are okay for us. And we don't realize that vaccines are unsafe at any speed.
Mm-hmm.
And they're full of chemicals and they're full of things that have a downstream effect. Now we want to talk about things like global warming when it comes to automobile industry and the transportation industry. But when you you look at like where this hits a crossroads for like the drug industry, we don't know what the downstream effect is 10 years down the line, 5 years down the line, 20 years down the line, 50 years down the line.
Mm-hmm.
A life expectancy is actually diminishing now, whereas we used to be to the point where we were having more centurions, which are 100-year-olders, than we ever had in the history of mankind. But now, because of the pharmaceutical industry and the way that the chemicals are actually being pumped into the elder generations, now those people that were growing older are now starting to backslide, and we're having less life expectancy. And we think that just because we have more drugs that we have a higher quality of life. And as you've noticed being a mother and seeing the real life effect, that's something we talk about in chiropractic is life effect. Like, what does this produce for you not to be able to do what you want to do? Oh, you want to play with your kids. So does low back pain stop you from playing with your kids? Yes. Well, what will you invest in that to make your low back pain go away?
Mm-hmm.
So these are the narratives that we have to start discovering. And like you did, you went down the rabbit hole. You started saying, hey, what does this look like for my family? Why are there other people that are up in arms and throwing their white flag in the air and giving up because now their kids are sick and they don't know where to go to? They've been stonewalled into the corner saying, I'm not going to listen to you. We don't have answers for you. There's nothing you can do. Now you have an injured child that you love. That's like the apple, as his parents call the apple of their eye. And now you have this child that you've loved, that you brought into this world, is now not what you wanted and not what your dreams were and not what your family's dreams were. So,
I think that if we can lay what we were taught down for just a second and just understand that there is no one size fits all ever in anything, even Tylenol. Not everyone can take Tylenol. There is no one size fits all diet. You know what I mean? Our hormones in our bodies are made up differently. So we have to take a different approach, even with that. So the same holds true for vaccines. There is no one size fits all. So I get a lot of backlash all the time where someone's been vaccinated. I was vaccinated as a child. I didn't have to say I was vaccinated. I seem okay. I feel okay. Systemic lupus runs in my family. My father had systemic lupus. My son, who was vaccinated up until the age of 2, he also was just diagnosed in 2018 with systemic lupus. So he's had chronic kidney failure. So we were in and out of, seeing a nephrologist since the 8th grade with him. We had no idea what was going on with him. He was an athlete. He played football. He's a wrestler. So every year that, came around for him to have his physical, his urine always came back, always had proteinuria and hematuria in it. So what does this mean? What is going on? Why is this always a factor? And they thought for the longest time that he had maybe something different. But when I explained my family history and talked about my father, because my father had, it started in his kidneys, the lupus did. So they did a biopsy of his kidneys and realized, oh, wow, you have lupus nephritis. This is, whatever. But the thing is like you go on the CDC website, which I did, and they tell you that if you have an autoimmune disease and you shouldn't, or you should avoid certain vaccines because what happens is that it induces what's already there. Mm-hmm. So if you're already prone to an autoimmune disease and then you inject yourself with certain chemicals, then you're kind of like stirring the pot and you're going to induce your symptoms faster, which means like if my son was going to get lupus anyway, right? Because this is what some doctors and scientists say. Well, he's going to get it anyway. He's just getting it sooner. Well, to me, that's probably the dumbest thing that anyone could ever say to me, because I want to prolong my children's life as much as possible. I don't want my children to have symptoms at an early age. So I always think back like, wow, what if he wasn't vaccinated? Would he maybe start seeing symptoms in his late 20s versus when he was in the 8th grade? So, one will never know, but that is something that always plays in my mind.
You've made it to Chiro Hustle Live. Sit back and learn from the greatest influencers in the profession. This week's episode is brought to you by Imaging Services, Chiro, Chiro Moguls, Mahalo Wellness, McCaffrey's Clinical Mentoring, Local Gold, Chiro Health USA, The Goodman Factor, Chiropractic Rocks, Winner's Edge, Accident Records, Chiro Tax Pro, Full Script, your online dispensary, Angela Pearson, author of I'm Not Contagious, and Digital Hustle. Let's hustle.
A lot of what you're saying, if you ever go and do a quick Google search or YouTube search for a guy named Dr. Reginald Gold, we know him as Reggie Gold, and he's one of the most famous modern day chiropractors for his stance on the chemistry of life. And he talks about the organ system, the nervous system, the glandular system, and how all of those have a downstream effect from a misalignment in the vertebrae called a subluxation. And when somebody's subluxated in their spine, it's going to have a downstream effect on the organ system. But what happens now is when we have this chemistry of life and we're putting chemicals into people that it's foreign to the body and it's coming in, that like you're saying, everybody has a different processor. Everybody processes things differently. Like some people have food sensitivities. Some people have colitis. Some people have eczema. Some people have, some people die. Mm-hmm. There's these things that trigger inside of us because we're putting foreign antibodies into a healthy person. And we think that it's preventative, but really what it does is it actually muddies the water and it causes confusion inside on a cellular level. And then the cellular level starts to speak to itself and there's no connection. And then that's when disease sets in and people start getting sick. And 10 years later, like you're saying, well, why is the organ system functioning the way that it is? Would it not have functioned this way had we not put foreign antibodies into it and foreign tissues and foreign information? So that's why we have to really be cautious, like you're saying, about what we're doing to newborns, especially because, a newborn baby can fit in the palm of my hand, mm-hmm. as opposed to a 200-pound man, You know,
And they get the same vaccine. It makes no sense to me either. Like, I
Mhm.
don't understand why a newborn, I had another interview, and this is something that I spoke about myself, so you hit the nail right on the head, because it doesn't make any sense. So we need to, if you're going to vaccinate, and if someone's going to take vaccinations, because I'm not saying you shouldn't, I'm not saying you shouldn't. What I'm saying is you have to research yourself so that you can have an informed decision, so then you can figure it out if that's what's best for your family. But you can't be informed if you don't do the research. If you're only being told one side of the story, you cannot tell me that you are fully informed, because I'm going to call you out every single time, because you just can't be informed if you don't have all the facts there. Facts become lies when some are missing. It doesn't exist.
Well, I know that we've shared a lot of information on personal choices in your journey, in your holistic life, and some of the things that you've seen, and some of my information and knowledge on the chiropractic profession and how that can tie into your book.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that's something that you're really excited about. And one of the reasons that you wanted to join forces with Chiro Hustle was because getting your message out there. And the book is called I'm Not Contagious. And this is a labor of love for you, but it's also something that gives people something as a resource and something that you're very proud of. So let's just talk a little bit about the book. And if people go to the link in the description above, you can go to angelapearson.com and you can get the book there. But let's talk about the book and what it means for you.
So this book is, was very, very special to me, because it holds such a powerful message. And it's not my message, but this book is based on true events, and it was written from the perspective of my 6-year-old son and how he feels about our New York State Governor Cuomo kicking him out of school, like so many other children across the country. So his whimsical approach, right? He has a very whimsical approach. It's very innocent yet powerful, and how societal pressures, especially like from, we have media outlets like CNN and talk shows like Jimmy Kimmel, just to name a couple. There's going to be a couple of mentions of that in the book as well. So this book was to influence change through compassion. Communication isn't enough. We have to start listening to things we wouldn't ordinarily listen to, just because it doesn't fit our narrative and how we think and believe. And I like to use the word I think, because there are so many individuals who are told what they should think and what they should believe, like I was growing up. Like when I was growing up, kids were just to be seen and not heard, and I wasn't allowed to ask questions. And I think that's something else that I've learned, even being a parent. I've learned not to smack my child's hands if they were to touch something. I don't remove things off of the table, because I want them to touch things. I want them to ask me what this is, because the more questions and the more you allow your children to ask those questions, you're raising them up. I don't want to associate their curiosity with pain. So when your child touches something and you smack their hands, they're now associating their curiosity with pain. So as they grow older, they're almost like, should I ask a question? Should I not ask a question? So that is something that I've learned to do, especially as a mother. But we do have to break that barrier, and we have to start asking those tough questions that really nobody wants the answers to. Because there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of things that we want to know, but we don't really want to know. Because if we did know, it would change everything in our lives. But we have to be, we have to make ourselves aware. We have to ask those hard questions. So for me, a person is only ignorant if they remain blind to the information that is so readily available for them. So this book has forced me, some say voluntarily, but to leave my job. I was looking for, as I was looking for guidance. So when this legislation became a law. October 19th, I left my corporate job of last year. It wasn't a question for me. I mean, some people say you were forced to leave. Some people say, you voluntarily left. So what do I think? I think that I was forced to leave, but I also think that I voluntarily left because I am not going to allow a governor or any law to dictate how I'm going to raise my children. I'm not going to allow them to instill fear into me and force me to inject my child with something that I do not believe in. So if I have to leave my job and take no income with me and start over from scratch, I will do it every single day of my life to protect my children. And that's what I did. So this book has a bigger message than even myself. There's so many other children that are going through the same thing that my child is going through. He asks questions. I encourage him to ask questions. He wants to know why he can't go to school, why he can't be with his friends, why everything was taken away from him. Why do people think that he's contagious? So I answer these questions for him, no holds bar. I don't sugarcoat anything with him because I think that's silly. Obviously, there's some things that I don't get into with him because he's 7 now. But it's definitely important for every child to have something that they can relate to. And there are many children like my son who have not been vaccinated, and there are no books for them. There are no books telling their story. So that is what this book represents. It doesn't just represent my son's story, but it's here to represent the stories of every child in the unvaccinated community and to give them hope and to fight for medical freedom. Then we're not going to give up. And we're going to stand strong as a community, regardless of what the government says, or anyone for that matter.
I admire you for your force. I admire you for your willingness to be a voice. I think the world is going to learn. I have something that it's just a very simple thing. Just learn. I tell people this all the time. Just learn. Mm-hmm. Like knowledge is power. And I really believe that you standing up for your family and yourself is something that many people are going to admire. And it's not just an act of admiration, but it's an act of courage. It's the willingness to push forward and to stand alone if you have to, but also stand for something, because there's this other saying that if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Mm-hmm. And I know that these are kind of cliche statements that I'm saying, but when people really believe in themselves and for a cause, and they want to be an advocate, not only for their family, but for other people's families, and they want protection of freedom of choice and freedom of rights, and they want to still live in the United States of America that has the freedom of speech and that has the ability to have freedom of how you raise your children and how you educate them. And you are right. You don't want to instill negative feedback into a child by the way that you communicate with them. And abuse is something that a lot of people don't talk about. And it's a very touchy subject, but even when you don't communicate the right way on a day-to-day basis, becomes a matriculation of abuse. And over time, poor behaviors are instilled. And before you know it, you've created a disconnect between what's right and what's wrong based on what's okay inside of the home. And when that becomes something of a problem, most people don't know how to address that. And then they have to go through therapy 30 years later, and they have to start unpacking some of this early childhood trauma because no one ever addressed it the right way early on. And I think that that's probably a way we can wrap up our talk today, is saying that vaccines, if they're not addressed the right way, will cause trauma and be something that we have to unpack and fix many years down the road. Mm-hmm. And so many people don't really understand that right now because of what a political stance is trying to do. And what, as your son had recognized with not being able to go to school because feeling contagious, the only thing that's contagious is the mind. And I really believe that if we train ourselves to be better to each other, say please and thank you, hold doors open for people, and treat people with good respect and respect ourselves and how we raise our families. I think that that's really where we need to come to terms today on how we can make a better future for tomorrow. And, we can all learn. We can all be more advocate for what we believe in, and we can all advocate for each other more. And that's really why we've created Chiro Hustle, because it keeps free speech alive and well in the chiropractic profession. And that's why we've built a unity with you and your movement with I'm Not Contagious in your book, because you keep free speech alive and well for the moms and the dads out there that need a solution. And I really believe that all roads are looking for a solution. And right now, people that are confused are easy to control. And if we start just connecting the dots for freedom, we will have a better tomorrow.
Absolutely. Well said. Well stated.
Well, I look forward to our next opportunity to jump on with you. I believe we have a feature episode that we'll be doing tomorrow. And I just thank you so much for your time today. I thank you for being a voice and a beacon of light and sharing your message and your story and your big idea with a larger public. And just really proud of you. And I can't wait to see what is going to be able to happen for the future. And I'm very hopeful. So thank you for being with me today.
Thank you for sharing your platform with me. I appreciate it so much. Much respect.
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Chiro Hustle Live. Don't forget to subscribe and check back next week to continue hustling.